doctor to differentiate tuberculosis and non-tuberculosis disease. No, for example, pneumonia. But when we say about pneumonia in differentiation with the tuberculosis, we say about location. No, this is very commonly for us, TB doctors. No, what we say, oh, tuberculosis is the upper lobes, and pneumonia, this is their location is low lobes, typical. But you should begin your speculations about differential diagnosis from clinical manifestation, because that's here in differentiation between tuberculosis and pneumonia, clinical manifestations plays the major role. It's very important because pneumonia is more pronounced disease. It is an acute disease with good pronounced, well-pronounced clinical manifestations. And maybe a cough, sometimes severe cough, temperature may be very high, no, it's febrile temperature as a rule, and so on and so forth. But sometimes in some scientific sources of literature, you can read about non-typical pneumonia, which are rather frequent in nowadays. No, it's true. There are pneumonia, non-typical clinical manifestations, what's so-called atypical pneumonia, but frequency of atypical pneumonia is not frequent. It's necessary to accent this information. And therefore, you should begin to differentiate tuberculosis and non-tuberculosis. You should accent pronouncing of clinical manifestations. And all typical for tuberculosis manifestations may be in the patient with pneumonia. All this may be, but more and more pronounced. Pay attention, please, to this information. What majority, about 65–70% of all pneumonia, these are diseases with acute clinical manifestations. Acuteness is a very typical peculiarity of pneumonia. That's the first. Then, according to along the clinical observation data, you should pay attention that pneumonia may have more pronounced clinical evidence. Note, for example, Moy-Strauss may be in pneumonia, but not be in tuberculosis. Pneumonia, at 65–70% of all cases have got Moy-Strauss during auscultation. And pneumonia may be recognized in the outpatients, clinical outpatient condition, in different, even on them in the field conditions. Pneumonia may be diagnosed, at least preliminary diagnosis may be established in the field conditions too. It's necessary to take into account. And then naturally, at Mycobacteria isolation. In pneumonia cases, Mycobacteria isolation can't be recognized. 40 forward. Nowadays, I read very interesting article from Voronezh, our neighbors. They presented clinical manifestations of tuberculosis during today. And they say that, that in tuberculosis cases, Mycobacterial isolation may be only in 47%, only between new tuberculosis cases, between fresh tuberculosis cases. Mycobacteria may be not recognized, about in half of all cases. No, it's necessary to seek it, because tuberculosis mycobacterial isolation is a very important pathogenetic symptom of tuberculosis, and presence of tuberculosis isolation, it is a very important symptom of tuberculosis nature of the disease. Well, then, and only after that you should discuss the problem of X-ray picture. And here you should point, and the doctor should be ready to receive your answer on this, about this information. You should say, I ask you, every tuberculosis shadow on the X-ray film of different form tuberculosis case is not specific. No, it may be foci, may be disintegration, may be infiltration, coin shadow, and so on. But, and I'd like to accent this information, tuberculosis picture in the whole picture. I mean, what do I mean? I mean complex of shadows on the X-ray of the case of tuberculosis may be rather typical. And you should know how to answer this question of the teacher. You should answer. Every shadow in the tuberculosis case may be non-specific, but complex of this shadow may have rather specific picture. And this picture may be presented as a picture with first of all foci shadows, but it's not enough to say foci. Foci are very different. Foci multiformity. Foci with different size, shape, and intensity. Вот это first of all. То есть monomorphous foci is not tuberculosis. It may be pneumonia as a rule. Это the first. Then you should say that tuberculosis case may have infiltration, but you should accent that infiltration of tuberculosis nature may be alone. This shadow may be combined with foci. What this is very important. Now, for example, tumor may have this X-ray symptom, coin shadow, but dissemination in surrounding tissue and other organs is not typical for cancer. cancer. No, it may be, but very rare, and you should know about it, and you should know about it, and you should seek tuberculosis foci if you see infiltration. Then, the third peculiarity. Oh, cavity is a ring-shaped shadow. Ring-shaped shadow of tuberculosis may be in combination with the foci too, and it's necessary to accent this idea. Cavity of tuberculosis nature is a source of tuberculosis infection, and this infection may expand in different organ, in different portions of the lung. Moreover, it may be source for extrapulmonary tuberculosis. Really? No, maybe. Итак, ring-shaped shadow may be recognized in the case of tuberculosis in combination with foci too. And foci in the infiltrated process, in the cavitary process, are typical for tuberculosis. I mean multiformity foci. Then, only after that, you should say, tuberculosis may be disseminated and may be limited. And disseminated may be in 10–20% of all new cases. In other cases, fresh tuberculosis case may have a limited process in the lung. What do I mean? It means about 2 or 3 segments affected if changes of tuberculosis nature more than in four segments in the both lung or реже single lung. This is disseminated process. What does it mean, disseminated process? It means immunity against tuberculosis on the low level, and tuberculosis may be disseminated in other portions of the lung. It's necessary to say about location. It's very important characteristic of tuberculosis. Local dissemination in 75–80% of all cases with new tuberculosis. Recognize of new tuberculosis case will be very important task for every doctor, including you, young doctors too. Then you should take into account that tuberculosis is a chronic disease. What does it mean? It means longitudinous presence of tuberculosis, inflammatory process in the lung leads to growing of sclerosis. And therefore, if you see different changes in the lung, you should compare right and left lung, and you should seek changes in the volume of the lung. And if this process is rather long, one of the lung may be less than opposite lung too. It's very important characteristic of tuberculosis too. And at last, on the last characteristic, it is enlargement of lymph of lung pattern. What do I mean? I mean lung pattern may be increased. Why so? Because tuberculosis is non-tumor disease. It's not only granulomatosis disease. It is inflammatory disease, first of all. And therefore, inflammatory process in the lung may be characterized as the process, again, the background of congestion. in the lung. And therefore, you can recognize this enlargement of lymph node. And you should know these symptoms. You should know, and teacher may ask you during examination, how do you think? What is enlargement of a lung pattern? And Yen Hingley, it may be examined in Zoom if you enlist of the students, list of the students. All this, out Henley, Yen Hingley, just a minute. You can, just a minute, I'm sorry. What, just group, Yankee, mean what's your group? Oh, I'm sorry, but your name is not present in the list of the students who may be pass examination in the. Так что you should come, nothing to do. Well, then you should take into account that that deformation of lung pattern, it is irregular division of the vessels in the lung. And when division of the vessels in the lung is forking, this is normal. And if forking division is not presented, you can say about deformation of lung pattern. What all these symptoms should be taken into this kind of examination. Then you shouldn't take into account Mantoux test. Mantoux test may be in the task in your examination card, and you should memorize, and I said and discussed this problem, you should memorize that positive Mantoux test. It is a very reliable sign of infection in the body. Infection in the body of the case. No, nothing to do. And therefore, if you see positive Mantoux test, risk of tuberculosis is more pronounced. And you may be sure that tuberculosis nature may be excluded. No, not in every case. You should take into account another diseases and different reasons of suppression of immunity. It's necessary to answer these additional questions. And I'd like to repeat, when you begin to answer solving of the task, you should see, in my opinion, this is infiltrated tuberculosis in the right upper lobe in the state of disintegration, mycobacteria, isolation, negative, without different concomitant diseases and different residual images. What that? I mean, this is what. And then you can continue, and the teacher may ask you, oh, how do you think? Is it preliminary diagnosis or it is conclusion diagnosis? And you should answer, doctor should be doubtful on every state of his diagnosis work. And therefore, I see this task first of all, and therefore my diagnosis is preliminary. And only next far examination, this case, I can receive all necessary information, including cause of this disease, in order to establish diagnosis, conclusion, diagnosis, finished diagnosis. What you can say, then you should ask, you should answer another parts of the task, and it may be very, very good. Вот. And then еще once more information for you. Видите, English culture, language culture, and Russian language cultures are differentiated. No, for example, English culture in conversation may be characterized as a long phrases. Yeah. No, for example, American, for example, hey, forgive my mask, forgive my glove, forgive my hat, and so on. But English culture, in full English, it may be, if you don't mind my saying so, I'm awful, if so, and so on and so forth. During answering the questions, you should use short answer, which should be typical for you. No, it may be rather difficult, therefore I can't insist these short answers from you. Not try to accent major idea of your conversation. Accent the main idea. Your answer may be very polite, very, maybe very kind of you to a very long answer, but major idea should be accented. And because examination, it is illustration of your knowledge of tuberculosis. No, and at last, we are Department of Clinical Immunology, Allergology, and Tracheology, and therefore, during examination, our head of the department may visit our examination, may ask some questions about immunity of tuberculosis. And therefore, you should be ready to answer these questions. You should show that you know immunity against tuberculosis. First of all, you should know that immunity against tuberculosis is a non-sterile and cell-bound. But she may ask, oh, how about another peculiarities of immunity? You can ask that immunological answer in tuberculosis disease may contain not only cell-bound mechanism, but humoral mechanisms too. What at least you should know. And during infection, during progression of the disease, all these changes may be taken into account, because pathogeny of tuberculosis, you have this answer, includes this peculiarity of immunity. Итак, well, non-sterile and cell-bound and humoral components of immunity may take part, but only as an evidences, only is visitors of this process, only of the additional component of immunity answer. What this should be taken into account too. No, then all questions were present, and you could prepare, and I hope you answer answer with good marks. I show, I hope for the best, of course. What? Because this information that I'd like to emphasize in conclusion of our discussion, I'd like to emphasize that tuberculosis of theology, it is a clinical discipline, clinical subject, and a lot of peculiarity of this chronic inflammatory process may be used in discussing the problems with another chronic diseases. Now, for example, morphological changes, granuloma formation. A lot of granulomatosis diseases are present now, and you should know these granuloma changes, their nature, their architecture of this granuloma process, and so on and so forth. Besides, you should read about sarcoidosis, some words, because this is very interesting rule. Less tuberculosis morbidity level, more sarcoidosis morbidity level. This is very important. I think everything will be all right. You should receive masks, and because COVID is traveling along the world, in spite of all prophylaxis measures, this is not very good disease, and it may have different problems with the brain. Your brain will be the major instrument in your service. Diagnosis, establishment, it is half of efficacy of the treatment. If you examine, if you establish diagnosis, treatment may be effective in majority cases also. You should keep silence when you will await your order. I hope for the best. Have you any questions?
No questions, sir.
Excellent. Хорошо, very good. Что, my dear colleagues, I'd like to sorry on my late. I'm very old. It's very bad. My late. Nothing to do. Conditions may be higher than our ideas, our streams. Well, let's finish our consultation. Yes. I wish you good luck. Thank you for your time. Take care, please. Take care, and tomorrow you should come to examination in good health, and you will have good marks. Goodbye.
Спасибо, сэр.
Take care. До свидания. Секуэда. And good luck, good luck. See you tomorrow.
See you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. De nada, de nada.
Obrigada.
Хорошо, goodbye. Hola, pagandas. Goodbye. Ciao.